Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Director Wray. Before I get into the primary topic of my remarks, I want to ask you about a separate issue. On June 16th, my esteemed colleague, Ranking Member Raskin of the Oversight Committee, sent you a letter asking the FBI to publicly reiterate certain non-classified information that it provided in an oral briefing about Form FD 1023, subpoenaed by Oversight Chairman Comer. It has now been almost a month since Mr. Raskin sent his letter. When can he expect a response?
I'll have to check with my staff because we've gotten so many letters from so many members, and that's each one of them is important to me. But as I sit here right now, I don't know when the timing is, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
And more importantly, we'll get back to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and we will follow up. Okay. Especially because I did ask directly of your staff, so we'll follow up. And now, St. Louis and I are here today in continuing solidarity with the protesters, the advocates, and movements that are actually targeted by surveillance and other law enforcement abuses in this country. Director Wray, I know that you are aware of the FBI's long and sordid history of targeting Black protesters and activists. At a hearing before this committee in December of 2017, you characterized the abuses related to COINTELPRO as, quote, one of the darker moments in the FBI's history. It's something we're not proud of, but it is also something we've learned from, end quote. But Director Wray, isn't it true that an FBI agent improperly ran a batch query of unminimized FISA information using the identifiers of 133 individuals arrested in connection with the protests after the murder of George Floyd in 2020? Just a yes or no is fine.
Well, I'm aware of the instance you're talking about. Whether or not that correctly describes it or not, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's in the most recent FISC opinion, but what I will tell you is that incident is non-compliance. I consider it unacceptable, and most importantly, it predates all of these fixes and corrective measures and reforms that we've put in place, which I think would have prevented it from happening now.
Thank you. And now on to Zero Fox. Isn't it true a firm hired on a $14 million contract by the FBI, which we've heard already today, to monitor social media threats, previously labeled Black Lives Matter activists as threat actors requiring constant surveillance? Yes or no?
I'm not sure that's a correct description of the way we do work with Zero Fox, but I don't know that that's a correct description of how we do it.
So did the FBI hire the firm?
My understanding of Zero Fox is it has a tool which allows us to in certain instances, engage in social media searches to prevent threats.
So the
FBI,
so they weren't hired.
I don't know, again, the terms of our arrangement, like whether it's a retention or what, but I've heard the term Zero Fox before, and my general experience is it's usually used in connection with preventing violence at a particular critical incident of some sort.
So to the tune of $14 million, though, there is reporting that threat actors was actually what they label Black Lives Matter activists, two of whom I know very well. And I served more than 400 days on the ground during the Ferguson uprising myself, more than 400 days, many of those days with those two people that were named and who are not violent. Isn't it true that the FBI has been actively involved in the law enforcement response to people protesting the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, a response that has included state charges of domestic terrorism against protesters? Yes or no?
Well, our Atlanta division is working in support of our state and local partners when it comes to violence and threats of violence that occur amid the unrest that you're referring to.
So the FBI is involved. These are not isolated incidents, and as I said, they're part of a long history of abuses by the FBI against Black and brown communities and progressive movements. These are the real oversight issues. They matter to my district where there is real and justified skepticism of whether the civil rights of Black and brown people are adequately protected. I know this from personal experience in the Ferguson uprising and from other protest movements that I have been a part of. That's why I asked you about the targeting of protesters the last time that you were before us, because it also included me. But what my district is not concerned about is the Republican conspiracy theories and selective targeting of law enforcement agencies who try to hold their twice impeached, twice indicted cult leader Donald Trump accountable. The Insurrection Caucus wants to use this hearing to score immediate political points. They want to invade oversight. They don't want to conduct it. But we're talking about real issues, real reform that could actually save lives. So once again, I urge my Republican colleagues who claim to care about government overreach and weaponization to do the exact same. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just remind the lady that what we'd actually like to do is work with you to protect Americans' privacy, whether they've been targeted on the right or on the left.
Point of order. Point of order. Point of order.
Gentleman may state his point of order.
It's not your time.
I appreciate the point of order, and I was just getting ready to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate that.
I appreciate the reminder.
I want to follow up, Director Wray, about the Foreign Influence Task Force. So there have been exchanges with Mr. Johnson from Louisiana, Ms. Hageman over that, and I understand the difference. I want to respect the differences in characterization. Earlier this week, in denying a stay of its order, the federal court essentially said this isn't complicated. Follow the law as articulated by the United States Supreme Court in the area of the First Amendment. And that was it as far as it was concerned. The Foreign Influence Task Force is not a predecessor's decision. You set that up, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you've known about the continuous interaction with social media companies. You've known about, I'm sure you know about the testimony of Agent Elvis Chan, correct?
I mean, I don't know everything he's testified to, but I'm aware that he was...
Did you read his testimony?
I've read parts of it, yes.
Okay. And there were thousands of posts that were flagged to the social media companies. These meetings with social media continued across time on a periodic basis. And this court has found, and I understand where the point of disagreement is, I guess, at this stage is, but I believe it's fairly common sense, that if you've got a constant, expectant suggestions from the FBI to social media companies with respect to social media posts, at some point in time, it becomes a government decision or it becomes coercive in nature. That's what the court's preliminarily found. You all, that apparently is the line you decided to walk in setting this up. Today, it's sort of striking that you come in and you sort of casually acknowledge that among other things that we did pass through, I think you said, information from the Ukrainian SBU to social media, as if it's normal for the FBI to serve effectively as the agent of a foreign power, to help pull information out of circulation to which Americans otherwise would have access because the Foreign Intel Service doesn't like it. Now, those are my characterizations. I have tried to be a little bit more neutral in my language, and you can differ with them, but here's what I'm wondering. Why would you walk that fine a line with respect to Americans' fundamental constitutional rights at scale, especially with knowledge of past abuses by the FBI like COINTELPRO? You said earlier that the FBI wasn't even concerned about disinformation per se, but the foreign origins of the information. Assuming so, how does that comport with Lamont versus Postmaster General?
Well, I'm not going to try to engage on Supreme Court jurisprudence, but what I can tell you is that the...
Well, I mean, that's the point, though, Director Wray. And let me just ask you, do you know about that case? Do you know that case?
I've heard of the case.
All right. Right in the heart of the Cold War, at the behest of an American plaintiff, a communist, by the way, Supreme Court said that Americans have a First Amendment right of access to information, even if it is propaganda originating abroad. And in that case, the United States Postal Service could not interdict it. Do you know that, in essence?
Again, I'm not familiar with the holding of the case. I'd have to review it to be sure that that's correct.
That seems to me the trouble. I keep wondering as I read all these revelations how that could be. Or then, let me go to this. You know that the FBI engaged with the social media companies, continuously warning them of hack and leak operations in 2020. Not 2018, by the way, but before the 2020 election. Lots of warnings about hack and leak. You're aware of that?
I'm aware that we gave them lots of information about intelligence that we were receiving from some of our intelligence
At the
community
time you were
partners.
giving them those warnings, the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop for more than 9 months. And, but of course, COINTELPRO itself was the mother of all hack and leak operations. Leftist activists at the time broke into the FBI's office in Media, Pennsylvania, stole the files, gave them to the media, and newspapers published them. And you're bound to be aware of New York Times Company versus United States, the Pentagon Papers case.
Yes.
That says that even if information has been stolen or inappropriately taken, that you can't get a prior restraint in almost any circumstance to prevent their being distributed. So how is it that your foreign influence task force is out warning of hack and leak operations to innocent, not involved in the hack, that would be criminal, but or social media organizations where information may be circulated?
Well, first off, we're not engaging in any prior restraint. Second,
wow.
Second, well, let me, if I could finish, please. Second, there's no serious dispute that foreign adversaries have and continue to attempt to interfere in our elections, and that they use social media to do it. President Trump himself, in 2018, declared a national emergency to that very effect. And the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan, overwhelmingly bipartisan way, by the way, not only found the same thing, but called for more information sharing between us and the social media.
I hear you, but it doesn't justify trampling the established First Amendment rights of Americans as the Supreme Court has declared them. Whether or not, frankly, I agree with them, or you agree with them. And I just don't, that's what I don't get. You come here and the comments are sort of blasé answers. Accountability is always down the road. We never arrives. And I'm not trying, I guess I'm joining the gang up, but what I'm concerned about, and I think Americans are concerned about, is they just never see it. I don't know of an answer other than to take an appropriation from you that's very significant, or to do something to take your intel powers away and put them in another agency. I honestly want to know.
Mr. Chairman.
And I think Americans want to know. I yield.
We sure do. The gentleman from Maryland who keeps us on time is recognized.
Until it's my turn, then I'm going to run over to.
Wait till it gets into this 5 minutes, yeah.
Gentleman's time is about ready to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate you coming in today. I saw a characterization of this hearing as a GOP-FBI grudge match, but I must say that the only grudge that's been seen here is from the Republican side. I think you've done an outstanding job with your testimony today, even when you've been, admitting that there are shortcomings by your office, that mistakes have been made. I appreciate the fact that you are willing to do that, because it's not easy for agency heads to do that, and also, more importantly, to point out the changes that you've made to try and address those concerns. I want to say this too. There's a couple points that have been made here about, you were just talking about the Foreign Influence Task Force, and I know there's a lot of talk about this as being some kind of prior restraint or First Amendment violation, but I want to say that I'm on the side that thinks this is a very important tool for the FBI and the United States government to have, especially with respect to potential intervention or interference, especially by Russian state actors with respect to American elections. There's some people who think, and I'm kind of starting to agree, that one of the reasons some of my colleagues are pushing so hard against this and other aspects of information protection within the United States is because they want to have Russian interference in the 2024 election.
Oh, please.
I certainly don't. So I certainly thank you for continuing your efforts on that front. There was an issue that was raised about whistleblowers earlier in the hearing, and I wanted to bring this up. I know you can't speak to this, Mr. Director, but these are two checks that were written to some of these witnesses, two of the witnesses that testified here, and they are for over $250,000. Now, they came after they gave their testimony, I think by a few days, but from my perspective, this is something that the American public should know when they evaluate the testimony of these individuals. And hopefully I don't know if the majority knew about this but didn't disclose it at the time or what was going on with it, but in my book, this really brings the credibility of these witnesses' testimony into question. And I think we should keep this in mind when we evaluate the allegations that they've made. I also want to say this too. My Republican colleagues have come a long ways from the law and order days of the Republican Party back when I was a kid. Now we're at defund the FBI. I think one of them selling T-shirts to try and raise money using that slogan. Another colleague is talking about abolish the ATF. Another one wants to say defund the Department of Justice. But as you mentioned in your testimony earlier, the FBI is doing a lot of great work protecting the country from terrorism, foreign intelligence threats, international cartels. There's weapons of mass destruction that you mentioned in your testimony. I appreciate that. And also, there's been a great deal of talk about the domestic terror threats. For me, the planned attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan and apparently kill her was chilling to the extreme, and I appreciate the fact that you all were able to intervene on that. I want to say this quickly too. I'm running short on time, but the misinformation and weaponization claims that have been made by my Republican colleagues, I want to offer these 2 articles. One is called, it's by Aaron Blake of the Washington Post, All the Ways Trump, Not His Foes, Sought to Weaponize the Government. And then another one, this is Philip Bump. This is on the Missouri v. Biden case, which was quoted extensively at the beginning of the hearing, a deeply ironic reinforcement of right-wing information. The point of this article is that the Missouri v. Biden decision, which, and I know you can't comment on it because it's pending litigation, but I also think it's being challenged by the Department of Justice, and rightly so, because it's riddled with factual inaccuracies and legal inaccuracies as well. One other article for the record, this is by Lee Littman and Lawrence Tribe. Restricting the government for speaking to tech will spread disinformation and harm democracy. I'd like all of those admitted. And then lastly, with respect to the Hunter Biden issue, there's a letter from Abby Lowell, who represents Mr. Biden. This is to Representative Jason Smith, but I think also to Chairman Jordan as well, that raises the pushback on the allegations. That points out that the investigation began during the Republican Trump administration, was supervised by 2 Republican attorneys general, was carried over by a holdover Republican U.S. attorney. Last point I want to make, I promise I won't run over my time much. I happen to represent the district where we contain 2 of the sites where the FBI headquarters could be moved to. The chairman made a reference to maybe not wanting to fund the move, but I must say, I think I had an office near your building. They've got nets around it to keep parts of the building from falling down and hurting pedestrians. The move is important, and also would give you a chance to consolidate. Hopefully you'll bring it to Prince George's County. We'll save $1 billion for the taxpayers. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, FBI's mission is to protect the American people and uphold the U.S. Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a couple years ago, it was a hearing, and I actually, looking on all of the concerns that I've seen was really warrantless surveillance and abuses of Section 702 of FISA. I compare your agency to KGB, and spending 2 years in this committee, reading a lot of reports now, doing a lot of hearings, I am really shocked that your agency is involved not just unlawful surveillance of American citizens, intimidation of American citizens, censorship of American citizens, potential cover-ups of convenient political figures, and potential setups of inconvenient political figures. And a lot of my colleagues asked a lot of questions, but I think when we look at that, and unfortunately we haven't been doing our job authorizing spending, which was not authorized by our committee already for over a decade, we're going to have this serious conversation and including reauthorization of Section 702. But I want to talk about, follow up on some other issues that you mentioned about that my colleagues I was talking about, and you mentioned that you focus on malign foreign actors. So in Durham report, which describes 2020, he states, and this is a quote, "Steel subsources could have been compromised by the Russians. FBI never gave appropriate consideration to the possibility that the Steele reports was Russian disinformation. No vetting happened. You have some falsified FISA court application. You have some very shady, confidential human sources that you kept paying for them. Nothing was about it. Some of your head of counterintelligence division was accused of taking money from Russian oligarchs just recently this year. So you said it all was bad. Now we go to 2022. Your agency is involved with SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, to actually provide information to big tech to censor just views of American people. No vetting seems as happening. This is information, actually a lot of this information was pro-Russian against Ukraine and pro-Putin. Your agents just pass it along. It seems like nothing happened. And it's interesting for me that, when I raised some issue, actually beginning of July, and what's happening in Ukraine, I don't have any confidential human sources, just using common sense and intelligence that something is wrong happening in Ukraine. It seems like there is a lot of infiltration. I was attacked. Oh my gosh, how can you question? Well, strangely enough, after me raising this question in the middle of July, President Zelensky fired his SBU top guy, opens over 600 investigations, is potential, infiltration by Russians, and then fire a lot of other people for corruption, and anti-corruption prosecutor was suddenly installed. But what is really interesting for me, how could you have these processes, and are you doing actually any investigation to look? Because it seems to me, as I understand, you still have our agencies working with SBU, with, coming from KGB time, and FSB time has a lot of potential to have this infiltration. Are you doing any investigations on these issues?
Doing investigations on...
Yeah, to look at that, why we're doing unvetted information we're taking from SBU, which actually was infiltrated and given to censor Americans to our big tech companies. Are you looking into that as an agency?
I'm not sure there's an investigation that is directly on point to what you're saying. I mean, certainly the SBU is an agency that we
So we're not doing
worked with for a long time.
So did we change the processes now, since we know your guys work with SBU? SBU was infiltrated by Russian, and big tech was censoring American citizens with this unvetted information that actually was provided by Russians. Do you change any processes? Or is it still happening? You have still the same processes that happen. Is it still happening now?
Well, the engagement that we had with SBU was during the...
But I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Because recently, some of your agents had actually a joint meeting, and they were bragging how they're top cooperations with SBU. Did you change processes?
I'm not sure what processes you're talking
To
about.
vet information.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Again, during the period at the beginning of the invasion...
No, I'm talking right now.
Yeah.
Do you vet information that you get from agencies like SBU? I mean, I don't know if are we being stupid? I understand. Are we being infiltrated by Russians or corrupt? I don't understand why we're not vet information with such a really challenging agency. So are you changing anything of that? I would like to have a briefing or something on this, because if you're not looking at that, I have a huge problem with that.
I'm happy to try to see if we can arrange to get you a better briefing on the subject.
Because this is a serious national security issue. Are you back?
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina. Oh, unanimous consent. I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. The lone ranger on this side.
Thanks for sticking with us.
We appreciate you for a moment, and all of my members. Let me just quickly indicate that I have a document that is a tweet that is wanting to submit into the record. Two of the Republican witnesses were gifted 255,000 checks, 255,000 in checks immediately after they testified before this committee. It seems to be quid pro quo, but the fact of the tweet that I'm submitting from Mr. Kyle Serapin says the fact that Mr. Allen has not yet cashed the check is not that he did not receive the check. So I submit in the record the tweet from Mr. Serapin, who indicated that two gentlemen, Garrett and Marcus, were receiving a check of
Continuing your attack on whistleblowers without objection. Those are
just a clarification, Mr. Chairman, and then finally, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, Strategic Intelligence Assessment and Data on Domestic Terrorism, dated October 2022, Appendix A, the document itself, Appendix A, Appendix B, and the categories of domestic violent extremism.
Without objection.
Your kindness is appreciated. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few weeks ago, Special Counsel Durham confirmed the FBI had bias against President Trump and took unprecedented steps to go after him during the 2016 presidential election. The Durham report showed, 1, the FBI did not have an adequate basis to launch the investigation. 2, it didn't verify or examine all of the evidence. And 3, the FBI was politically charged against then-candidate Trump. This, of course, was before your time. But here we go again. In August of 22, the FBI raided the personal residence of President Trump. This unprecedented raid was a shocking escalation in what we talk about with the weaponization of the federal government against political opponents. You know, our country is almost 250 years old. We've had 46 presidents. This is unprecedented. When we say it's unprecedented, we mean it. This has never been seen before in our country's history. Just like we saw in the Durham report, the FBI did not follow traditional protocols, and this investigation was chock full of abnormalities. So I kind of want to go into those a little bit. Director Wray, as you know, the committee recently conducted a transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antuono, the former assistant director in charge of the FBI's Washington field office. He has over 20 years of FBI experience, and he expressed some strong concerns with your department's handling of the case, the DOJ's handling of the case. The first abnormality deals with the FBI office that they conducted the raid themselves. Director Wray, generally speaking, which FBI office oversees Palm Beach, Florida?
The Miami office has an office in Palm Beach, but to the question you're asking, it's not unusual for a field office that is investigating the case to send the case team down to be involved in conducting a search.
And President Trump's residence is in Palm Beach, Florida, is that correct?
Yes.
Director Wray, did the Miami field office conduct the investigation and search at Mar-a-Lago?
The Washington field office conducted the search, although I think there was some assistance by people from the Miami
But it was primarily run out of Washington and not the Miami field office.
which was the case team that had opened the investigation.
Did the FBI
based on a
headquarters-
referral from the National Archives, which is in D.C.
Did the FBI headquarters in Washington instruct the Washington field office to start that investigation and that raid at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, the investigation was opened in the field by the Washington field office.
Right. So it was not Miami, it was Washington.
And the Washington field office opened the investigation based on a referral from the National Archives, which is also in D.C., so that made sense to me.
Who made the decision to have the Washington field office execute that search warrant rather than the Miami field office?
I can't speak to the specific individual. As you know, this is an ongoing case, and internal deliberations about
Well,
an ongoing case.
I'm not asking about the facts of the case. I'm asking about who made the call to go to Washington and use the Washington field office as opposed to Miami? Would that have been you?
Well, no, the Washington field office opened the investigation because they're the office where the National Archives is, which is what referred the investigation and kicked off the whole investigation.
Director, on May 15th, 2023, the FBI, your special counsel, or excuse me, not your special counsel, your general counsel sent a letter to Special Counsel Durham in response to his report. In that letter, the FBI wrote, quote, FBI executive management has instructed investigations to be run out of the field and not from headquarters. So despite the location of the search occurring in the territory of the FBI's field office, the Washington field office instructed the raid. This is inconsistent with the FBI statement from 2 months ago. I want to move on to a second
Sir, I'm
abnormality.
sorry,
real
it's
quick.
actually not
I've got
it's
1
not
minute left.
inconsistent.
Well, I got 1 minute left, Director. Now, is it normal for a U.S. attorney to be assigned to an investigation, a high-profile investigation?
Well, that's a decision that's made over at the Justice Department as to how they allocate
But that's normal
responsibility.
protocol, is that correct?
I mean, there are investigations, prosecutions and cases that are handled by Main Justice. There are trial attorneys there, but again, I only speak to the FBI's decision-making, not to the Justice Department.
And a U.S. attorney was not initially assigned to this investigation, were they?
I think that's correct, but again, I would refer you to the Justice Department for any questions about U.S. attorneys versus Main Justice.
And the third abnormality that I find really troubling, probably the most troubling, quite frankly, is the FBI did not first seek consent to search the residence, did they?
Well, there is a very detailed filing in court that goes through in fairly excruciating detail the process that was followed that led up to the execution of the search. And it goes through in great detail the efforts that were made to secure documents. Because this case is now pending and moving forward in federal court, I want to respect that and not engage in more discussion beyond. But other than refer you to the filing, which
Director,
lays out in great detail, I
Here's
think,
the
the answers
frustration
to
that
your
I see,
questions.
Director. The Durham report laid out very clearly that in cases, just in general, that you cross every T and dot every I. That was not done here. You didn't run it out of the field office. You didn't have a U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Senior officials did not listen to people on the ground, as the testimony of Mr. Dan Tuono talked about. You didn't ask for consent from their attorney. You didn't ask for a consent search, despite the president having cooperated and handed over documents for a long period of time. And you refused to wait for President Trump's own attorney to get to Mar-a-Lago to do this with you. And so what has changed since Durham? You've acknowledged this in 2023, that things should be run out of the field, that you've made internal process changes, but nothing has really changed since 2016, and that's my big concern. With that, I yield back.
I could not disagree more, but we'll just have to disagree on that one.
Well, here's what he said. This is questions from the Democrat lawyer in the depositions to in the deposition of Mr. D'Antuono. Can you explain to the attendees here why the case was not assigned to, for example, the Miami field office? And Mr. D'Antuono's answer was, I have absolutely no idea. And then they said the investigation was handled differently. And he said, his answer was, it was handled differently than I would have expected to be than any other case is handled. So I think that was the member's point, and that's the concern that we have, in spite of the letter we got from your general counsel. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Wisconsin.
A recent poll found that 37% of Americans have a positive view of the FBI. And that's from an NBC poll. I wouldn't exactly call that right media propaganda, and I think I know why. Here's what the American people know and believe about the FBI today, sir. If you are a Trump, you'll be prosecuted. If you are a Biden, you'll be protected. And the American people that I represent are sick and tired of this double standard. It seems like every single hearing that we have in this room, we talk about the two-tiered justice system of Biden's DOJ and the FBI, and as we were talking earlier, here we are again. President Trump endured an unprecedented raid at his home in Mar-a-Lago. President Biden's home, however, was respectfully browsed. President Trump is facing up to 400 years in federal prison for allegedly being in possession of classified documents he obtained as the commander-in-chief of these United States of America. And meanwhile, President Biden is facing no charges for the classified documents he had held at his time as a senator and a vice president, not the president of these United States of America. And last I checked, he had no legal authority to declassify those documents. Assuming President Trump was in possession of said classified documents, would those documents be more secure, surrounded by Secret Service at Mar-a-Lago, or in a box, in a garage, behind your Corvette? You know the answer to that question. Question for you, sir. What can you tell us about the status of the FBI's investigation of President Biden's classified documents found next to his Corvette in Delaware and those found at the Penn Biden Center? Do we have an update on that, sir?
What I can tell you is that there is an ongoing special counsel investigation led by Mr. Robert Hur, and we have FBI agents affiliated with it, working on it, working very actively and aggressively with him on that case. I obviously disagree with your description of the two standards. In my view, at least under my watch, we have one standard.
Okay.
And that is we're going to pursue the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And I add that last part because especially in sensitive investigations, almost by definition, somebody's not going to like it.
So I understand, and that's actually why I led with the sentiment of the American people. I understand that's your sentiment. I do want to finish this. So I want everybody to talk about this dichotomy that we have seen. I get your point, sir, but that's just not what we see as the public, as we the people. We see one case being fast-tracked and one case being slow-walked. We see one president's home being raided, the other president's home being kindly searched. You have one government agency, the Secret Service, protecting the former president and his home, and another government agency, the FBI, raiding the same home. Now, to me, sir, that's tragically ironic. And we expect more from a functional constitutional republic, and these things shouldn't be happening. Now, it's my opinion that Joe Biden is the most unpopular president we have seen in a century, and that's why he knows the only way to stop President Trump from beating him in November is by putting him in jail. You talked about this, Mr. Fry. In the 247 years of this existence of this great nation, only one president has ever been indicted by the DOJ and has home raided by the FBI. Now, some have said that President Trump's indictment means that no one is above the law. Okay, all right, I would love to see that. But what about Hillary Clinton? And what about Joe Biden? And what about Hunter Biden, who is America's favorite son? And let me tell you something, I got a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter at my house. Hunter Biden to me is like glitter. He is on everything and you cannot get rid of him. And yet nothing is going to be done about this. We're sick of it. James Comey decided not to prosecute Hillary Clinton despite overwhelming evidence that she committed crimes. And as I recall, it was the position of the FBI to not prosecute because they didn't want to interfere with the presidential election. What do you call this? The Iowa caucuses are in 6 months. 6 months. I think the American public would expect to see this from Cuba and from Venezuela and from Russia and from China, but not here. The people expect us to have blind justice. They expect equal justice under the law. It is not the job of the DOJ or the FBI to prosecute Joe Biden's top political opponent, who is leading in every single primary poll, and the Iowa caucuses are in 6 months. Let the people decide. It's our job to uphold the Constitution. As a West Point grad and military veteran, this is the Constitution I give my life to protect, and I expect us all to uphold it likewise. Thank you so much for being here.
Mr. Chairman, may I briefly respond?
Sure.
So number one, as to the investigations related to Mrs. Clinton, as you noted, that happened under my predecessor, and I'm not going to attempt to speak for or defend that decision.
I recognize that.
Second, as to your descriptions of the investigations related to Hunter Biden, as you know, there is an ongoing investigation being led by the Delaware U.S. Attorney appointed by President Trump, and we are actively working on that investigation with him.
We look forward to seeing the results of this quickly and swiftly.
And third and finally, to your point about the American people and their views, I worry less about NBC polls or polls by any other news outlet, but I will tell you that the number of people in Texas applying to work for us since I've been in this job has gone up 93%, and in fact,
I'm not going to quote Matt Gaetz. I heard his response to this earlier.
In fact, we have
that's great,
more applicants from the state of Texas annually in the last several years than any other state in the country.
And that makes sense because Texas is the greatest state in the country.
Then I think that speaks very well of the view of Texans about the FBI.
Director, any agents who served on the Crossfire Hurricane investigation or the Mueller investigation, are any of those agents on Mr. Hur or Mr. Smith's special counsel team?
I don't believe so, but I can't, on the top of my head, go through the list of, there's a lot of agents involved in the 2 investigations, and so let me check into that and see if there's any way we can get back to on that, because I don't want to get out over my skis.
Thank you. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Wray, thanks for being here today. On June 21st, the committee heard testimony from Special Counsel John Durham. Have you reviewed his findings, and did you dispute any of those?
I have reviewed them. There's a big multi-100-page binder of it sitting right to my right on my desk, and I refer to it frequently. I can't say that I'm aware of anything specific that I would dispute in it. Certainly, as you may know, not only did we fully cooperate with him in the investigation, as he noted in his report, but I actually assigned a bunch of agents and FBI personnel to work on it with him to help him. And I'm very proud of the fact that the reforms that we've put in place in response to the Inspector General's investigation, also in the Crossfire Hurricane, as well as some other changes that we made working closely with Attorney General Barr, if those reforms had been in place back at the time that all of this stuff that Special Counsel Durham found, I don't think any of this would have happened.
So the confirmation bias, which was brought up time and time again when Durham was here before the committee, you feel those have been addressed? I think Jason Jones says you put together a letter and that includes a lot of that information. Do you feel it's adequate, or?
Well, I'm ambitious by nature for us as an organization, so we're constantly looking for more things we can do. But I'll give you an example on this issue of bias, because I think it's so important. One of the things that I did as FBI director, and I did this a couple of years ago, was in order, and this frankly, it was in reaction in many ways more to both the Hillary Clinton investigation as well as the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, was that I put in place training for the entire workforce that focused specifically not just on the importance of avoiding bias, but the importance of avoiding even the appearance of bias. And one of the things that I did to make sure that I was sending that message was that rather than like the way it normally happens in a bureaucracy where all the training gets saddled on all the folks on the front lines right out of the gates, I started with the top 200, 300 or so people in the organization, brought them all to Quantico for an entire day, stand down. We heard from the federal judiciary, the inspector general, the Hatch Act Office of Special Counsel, and the whole point of it was the importance of not just objectivity, but making sure that we are faithful to the appearance of objectivity as well. And then we had a smaller version of that went out to the whole workforce. But the idea was to send the message that everybody at the top has to take the medicine first.
So there's two other things that were in there. Serious lack of analytical rigor was one of the other things that Durham brought up numerous times. And then there was a noticeable departure from how the FBI approached matters involving possible attempted foreign election interference plans amid, as you just brought up, at the Clinton campaign. So the question would be, has the FBI protocols surrounding investigations, I want to know specifically in the presidential campaigns, what's the policy now? We're on the verge of another nationwide election, and I'm wondering, is there anything specific in writing that you could inform the committee of this afternoon?
Well, we put in place a whole slew of reforms that help to try to mitigate against the kind of concerns you're raising. Whether there's a specific one that I would think is I don't think there's any one that's a single silver bullet. I know that Attorney General Barr and I put in place certain reforms that dealt with particularly sensitive investigations and approvals that would have to be required before anything like that could happen. I know that was very important to him, and we worked together on that. But we have a whole slew of additional approvals, sign-offs, triple checks, safeguards, et cetera, that go into a lot of these kinds of issues. When you raise the issue of analytical rigor, obviously I talk about rigor. I bet my folks would tell you they hear the word rigor coming out of my mouth probably every single day. And that is something that we're always aspiring to get better at.
So if you had somebody within the FBI that you found out was involved in trying to manipulate or rig an election, especially at the national level, I mean, how would that be handled by the FBI? How would you handle it as a director?
Well, obviously it would depend on the specific facts as to exactly what it is the person was doing, but accepting your premise, that's the kind of thing that would have the person referred to our disciplinary process.
To be fired or terminated?
And the process would play itself out. I mean, we have a whole offense code that goes into, what different rules we have and different punishments, and there's a whole complicated system that goes into the disciplinary process. Our disciplinary process is, for the most part, I think one of the better ones in federal law enforcement, but there is a process that we have to follow.
Has anybody that was involved in that type of action in the past been disciplined for that at the FBI?
Well, let me answer that this way. Obviously, former employees, the important point here is that all the senior managers in any way involved in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation are all gone from the FBI for a variety of reasons in a variety of ways. To the extent that there's anybody left, you're talking about a small handful of currently line-level employees, all of whom have been referred to this disciplinary process. That process, as you may have heard me say in response to an earlier exchange, as is typical, working with Special Counsel Durham, we had to put that kind of on hold until he could finish his case, because the criminal case had to come first. And that process is now fully underway. But again, you're talking about a few relatively line-level people where we erred on the side of inclusion. So anybody who touched it, we sent them to the process, and we'll see where that plays itself out. But the key point is that all the main players, if you will, the senior people, are all gone. I put in place an entirely new leadership team.
Very good. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for your patience. So you're very, very good at your job, and as illustrated by the last 4 hours. And I just want to say that you're way better at defending than you are at explaining what you're going to do about the problems that have led to your dismal public profile. And I wish it was better, but I have the most recent poll here from, I think it's from Harris. Yes, it is, the Harvard CAPS Harris poll. 70% of respondents said that they were either very or somewhat concerned about interference by the FBI and other intelligence agencies in elections. 71% agreed that changes post-2016 had not done enough to prevent further interference and that wide-ranging reform still required. Now, I also, pretty interesting article in the Inquirer, the damning Durham report, and I'll just read from you this quote from Mr. Durham. The promulgation of additional rules and regulations to be learned in yet more training sessions would likely prove to be a fruitless exercise. So you must have done something more than promulgating additional rules and regulations, because to me, that doesn't do much at all when we're going to an issue that probably is cultural. And to that end, I just want to share with you some of the things I hear from my sheriffs across my 20 counties. So I have 20 county sheriffs. In fact, one of my brothers used to be one for 15 years. And so I called him, my brother, and I said, hey, what was your experience with the FBI? And he said, they're very qualified. But when they appear, you know you have to be aware that part of their job is to enforce Section 1983. And he pointed that out just because there's a constant tension between FBI and local law enforcement. Would you agree? And by the way, when you go out and you talk to sheriffs, nobody's going to say to the director of the FBI, we don't like you. Why would they do such a crazy thing? They want your help. And by the way, I asked for your help down in Southern Oregon against all the drug cartels. And to your credit, and your office out of Portland's credit, you did your best to help. You don't have very many people there, but you did your best to help. But for you to come in here and say, I've never heard from a sheriff that we're doing a bad job. Well, no, you haven't. But now tell me, am I wrong? Am I saying that sheriffs would walk right up to you and say, you know, you're doing a bad job? I mean, how many have said that to you?
Well, my experience with sheriffs actually has been that they are often very colorful and very blunt in their communications.
But you didn't mention.
So I feel that they.
But let me, forgive me for interrupting. But earlier today, you didn't say anything about them being negative. And what I'm trying to get at here is, you've done your job today to defend your agency, and good for you. But it's not what we're here today. I want to go to Durham's page 288 of his report. And this is going to the heart, I think, of what your problem, part of your problem may be. And he's making his observations. He's very careful to protect you. He says, in making observations, we're mindful of the benefit of hindsight. And then he says this, some FBI employees who were interviewed by our investigators advised they had significant reservations about aspects of Crossfire Hurricane and tried to convey their misgivings. Others had doubts about the investigation, did not voice their concerns. In some cases, nothing was said because of a sense there had to be more compelling information in possession of those closest to the, and still other and current former employees who maintained they did their best to take reasonable investigative steps and acted within your procedure and guideline. Here's what I'm getting at here is, I don't think people within your organization are comfortable calling out negative things. I don't think they are. And I wouldn't be either. I'd be worried, because I look at what happens to whistleblowers and others. I'd go, oh man, this is not a safe place to be. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. And I think that is not a good thing for your agency. But you know where it starts? It starts with actually admitting that you got a problem. And I don't think you're very good at that either. I'm going to your testimony, page 13. You might want to look at it. I'm sure you wrote it, so you probably don't have to. But on page 13, last paragraph, you write, to be sure, nobody more deeply shares members' concerns regarding past FBI, and here's the words, compliance violations. Compliance, is that all they did? Aren't there a whole bunch of better terms? I went to ChatGPT to find out, and I found these words that might have been better. But I'm really asking you: is that all they did? Didn't they break a law? Didn't they do something more than fail to comply? I'm asking you. If the culture is the issue, doesn't the leader have to at least call out bad acts a little more aggressively? That's my question.
Number one, depending on what the violation is, that may or may not be the right description. Some of the things that have happened in the past are things that I have deplored in the strongest possible terms. Some of the things that have happened in the past, I think, are described as compliance violations. So there's no one description that fits everything that has gone wrong at the FBI over the last 5 or 10 years. My language, in general, tends to be fairly measured. I think that's a fair statement about me. Some people refer to me as low-key, but no one should ever mistake my demeanor for what my spine is made out of. And I have made it very clear to our people over and over and over again that I expect them to do their work in the right way with rigor and objectivity. And as to FBI employees' willingness to speak freely and to complain, much like our exchange about sheriffs, I will tell you, your description of our employees doesn't fit with my experience. When I get out to all 56 field offices, one of the things that I do, especially on this last round, my second round, was to meet with employees without their executive management present, just me and them, including people who are retirement eligible. And we have a term, an affectionate slang term for people who are retirement eligible. It's called KMA. You can guess what KMA stands for, and it reflects their ability, because they're retirement eligible, to be able to speak freely. And they complain to me about all kinds of things, and we have a very lively conversation. So I'm quite confident that my employees feel comfortable talking to me about problems and things that we need to fix. But my demeanor is part of what you're reacting to.
Yeah, forgive me for interrupting, but my time is over. I want to thank you for your candor, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Wray, thank you for being here. You know, believe it or not, I'm basically just a simple country dentist, but I do know my dentistry. And one thing I know about are abscesses. If you have an abscess, you can have a mild or moderate one, and you treat it with antibiotics and warm salt rinses, and in a week to 10 days, it'll be better. If you have a severe one, you've got to take a scalpel to that abscess. You've got to cut it open, and you've got to let the pus and the blood and the gas drain out. If you don't, that abscess will travel. It'll travel to the patient's brain possibly, or to their heart, and it definitely can kill them. That's the type of infection that I feel is within the FBI today. It has gotten so deep that we need to get in there with a metaphorical scalpel before it kills our nation. We need real structural change, and this committee is that metaphorical scalpel. A clear sign of the rot is a memo where your agents, and I know you say you feel bad about this too, but nevertheless, and I don't think you like to talk about it, but your agents in the field office attempted to spy on Catholic churches and their congregations and frame them as extremists. This is unbelievable. How do we get there? Who exactly are the Catholics you're going to go after here, or they were going to go after? The charitable men of the Knights of Columbus that help their communities, that help charities, that help people in every way they can? Or maybe we meant the folks that are fighting for the sanctity of life? Or are you talking about those who hold true to their beliefs rooted in the traditional values and teachings of the Catholic faith? As a Roman Catholic myself, and I believe you are as well, I was deeply, deeply disturbed by this memo. And it's shameful. It was only rescinded after basically it got leaked to the public. That should scare each and every American, from parents at school board meetings to grandmas clutching their rosary beads. The misguided priorities of our intelligence community put every American at risk, and it is wrong. It is un-American, and it undermines two of our most important tenets: freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It's what our nation is built upon. Director Wray, you work for the American people. They pay your salary. They pay all of our salaries. They don't work for us. You work for them. You're supposed to protect them from the bad guys. And now many feel that they need protection from the FBI. I have a few questions here. Despite multiple requests, Why hasn't the FBI produced an unredacted copy of this memo that really outlines this? It isn't public security, it isn't national security, it isn't public safety. This is an internal thing that you all did that was wrong, and we as a committee, this committee, have the right to look at it. When are we going to get it? Why haven't we gotten it already? Unredacted.
We redact information for a variety of reasons that cover various rules that apply to us.
So I
our
want to know
ability
why
to
this one.
transparent.
I don't know about the rules. All I know, I told you, man, I'm not a lawyer, all right? But you know what I want to know? I want to know why we don't know what happened here. That people in their churches had to worry, and it isn't something that's going to affect national security. So whatever damn rule it is you have, we should change that rule. Because when something like this happens, and it isn't a matter of national security, then we should know. So I'd like to know when we're going to get it. I'd like a date certain.
What I can tell you is that we are almost done with our internal review, and as I said to the chairman, we're going to be providing a briefing to the committee on what the internal review found.
When?
It should be later this summer.
And why do we need your internal review? Good you're doing an internal review. You should do a lot internally. But why don't we get the information when we ask for it, when we subpoena for it? We clearly are not creating any risk to our nation or national security. You could give us that tomorrow. Why don't we get that part tomorrow, and then you can give us the briefing and the internal review?
As I said, we're going to give you a briefing on the internal review, and then we can discuss additional information that may.
Because you're going to try to shape it differently and make it out that it was kind of okay.
On that, no. I will tell you that I am not going to defend or excuse that memo
I
or that product.
understand you said that. I have simple yes or no. These are real easy questions. Has the FBI created or maintained any list of Roman Catholic churches? Yes or no?
Any list of Roman Catholic
Churches, correct.
We're certainly not targeting any Roman Catholic churches.
Well, they
That I can
were.
assure
They
you.
were. The field office was until we found out. But do you, as a yes or no, do you have a list? If you don't have a list, it's easy to say no.
Well, we have 38,000 employees. We engage with churches of all kinds.
So you may have a list of churches that you're looking at for possible
No. Not for possible investigation.
How about Russian Orthodox churches?
Same answer.
Greek Orthodox churches? Tell me, yes or no? Evangelical churches? Tell me yes or no.
We do not maintain.
Yes or no?
Excuse me?
Please answer yes or no.
It's not a yes or no question.
It is a yes or no. If you've got a list of churches that you're targeting and looking at, the answer is yes. If you don't, the answer is no.
If your question is, do we have a list of churches that we are targeting, then the answer is no, we do not have.
How about Jewish synagogues? Yes or no? Same question.
We do not maintain any kind of list of religious institutions that we're targeting because we are not targeting religious institutions.
Let me tell you, it's a sorry state of affairs that these questions are questions I have to ask, and it's a damn shame to see what's become of our once universally respected FBI. We need structural change, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, the 5 individuals who signed off on that memo, have any of them lost their security clearance during this internal investigation?
I don't believe anybody has lost a security clearance, but again, we have an internal review pending, and that I'll let that come to its conclusion.
How did you become aware of the Catholic memo that the gentleman just referenced?
How did I become aware of it?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman may state his point of order.
Whose time is the chairman consuming with
I thought for the committee, it's not a point of order. The chair now recognizes the gentleman for Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I will say this, Mr. Wray, I'm one of those sheriffs that will be very blunt with you today. That's right here. I've had an opportunity to look at your testimony, lots of stuff, and hear about numerous task forces, crimes being committed against children, including even infants and toddlers, MS-13 gang members coming across the open southern border, the poisoning and killing of the American people with fentanyl, the sex trafficking, the human trafficking. It's quite clear, it is clear that you guys are dealing with some of the sickest bastards in our society. I have an article here from CNN in January 2022 calling the January 6th investigation the biggest investigation in FBI history. And what shocks me about this, quite honestly, is that you don't mention January 6th, again, the biggest investigation, Not one time in your 14-page testimony. You don't mention it one time. And that makes me ask myself the question, what the hell are you hiding? Sir, you mentioned 38,000 agents and support personnel in your agency. How many FBI agents and support personnel have you assigned to the January 6th investigation?
I don't know that I know the number. I know we have a lot of people working on it in multiple
Then,
field
fair
offices.
enough, lots. Knowing that you are dealing with some of the sickest people in our society with investigations related to child sex trafficking, have you reassigned any of these agents or personnel to investigate January 6th? Yes or no?
I don't believe we have reassigned people away from child exploitation to January 6th.
Now, let me just say this, Director. I find that
my
answer
knowledge.
disturbing because last month, Steve Friend, he testified before the Weaponization Committee. Mr. Friend was a domestic terrorism investigator for you, and he was told by one of his superiors that January 6th was, I quote, a higher priority than pursuing child pornography cases, end quote. And for those of you watching in America, understand today's FBI is more concerned about searching for and arresting Grandma and Grandpa for entering the Capitol building that day than pursuing the sick individuals in our society who prey on our children. And Mr. Wray, your priorities are flawed. But let's rehash what we know so far, all right? It's the largest investigation in FBI history, and you don't mention it in your testimony. Agents have been reassigned from child exploitation cases and so on. So now let's get into the money, Mr. Wray. How much taxpayer money has been spent on January 6th?
I don't know that I have the figure
You don't have
on
it?
my
Okay,
head,
fine.
but
Mr. Wray, I got an article here, December 22, 2022, 2 years after the events of January 6th, and it says the Justice Department has requested another $34 million from Congress. And number one, you shouldn't get another dime. The FBI shouldn't get another dime for this political witch hunt against the greatest president in my lifetime, Donald J. Trump. I want to turn my attention now to this fella, this character, Mr. Ray Epps. We've all heard of him. We've heard of Mr. Ray Epps. He was number 16 on your FBI most wanted list. He was encouraging people the night prior and the day of to go into the Capitol. And Mr. Ray Epps can be seen at the first breach of Capitol grounds at approximately 12:50 p.m. Play the clip, please.
We need to go into the Capitol.
Into the Capitol.
Into the Capitol. What? We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word. All right, noted. Okay, but one more thing.
Yeah, so can we go up there? No?
When we go in,
are we going to get arrested if we go up there?
Yeah, you don't need to get
Just
shot.
arrest us.
There he is, breaching the line, going in at the first breach into the Capitol grounds, a restricted area. Mr. Wray, you have arrested hundreds of people related to January 6th. And there have been people arrested for breaching Capitol grounds. Cooey Griffin is an example. Rachel Genko is an example. And then we go to Mr. Brandon Strecka. Brandon was arrested for disorderly and disruptive conduct, which included yelling, I quote, "Go, go, go," as rioters tried to empty the Capitol. These three never went into the Capitol. They never assaulted anyone. So let's be honest with each other. There is very little difference between the actions of Ray Epps and Brandon Strecka that day, but yet Strecka was arrested and Epps wasn't. Epps also testified to the January 6th committee. He was back at his hotel when video evidence showed that he wasn't. He lied. He was on the Capitol grounds just as Brandon Strecka was. Epps even texted his nephew at 2:12 p.m. and said, I quote, "I was in the front with a few others." It was on the video. "I also orchestrated it." Now look into the camera, sir, when you answer my next question. Are you going to arrest Mr. Epps, yes or no?
I'm not going to engage here in a discussion about individual people who are or are not going to be prosecuted.
Can I get a commitment? You just watched the video. I'm an old law dog. I understand a little bit about probable cause. He did very little. There was very little difference what he did and Mr. Strecka. You can see him. He's encouraging, I almost think he's inciting a riot. He's encouraging people the night prior to go into the Capitol, the day of, go into the Capitol, and he was at the first breach, and he breached the restricted area. Everybody, a lot of people getting arrested for not going into the Capitol, but they're in the restricted area, but yet, Ray Epps, who many people feel, fed, right? And there's a lot of clout over this. So my point is this. You arrested a lot of folks for unlawful activity. You just saw the video, and I will tell you, Mr. Ray, if you don't arrest Mr. Epps, there's a reason behind it. I believe you know what it is, and it appears to me you are protecting this guy. I strongly recommend you get your house back in order. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I might briefly.
Gentlemen will respond, then we got a couple point of orders.
It is
Not
never,
unanimous consent, excuse me. Go ahead.
it has never been appropriate for an FBI director in congressional testimony to be weighing in on who is or isn't going to be arrested and who is or isn't going to get charged, which is a prosecutor's decision. If you are suggesting that the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources or FBI agents, the answer is no, it was not. And to suggest otherwise is a disservice to our hardworking, dedicated law enforcement professionals.
Can I respond to that now that the point is, he was number 16 on your list.
Yeah,
he was 16 on your list. You never arrested him. But hundreds of Americans were arrested. Shame on you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent for all members have 5 legislative days to submit any additional materials as well as any questions for the record for the director. And I would hope that those questions for the record we would submit would receive more timely responses than some of our letters have. I would further seek unanimous consent that the WhatsApp message from Hunter Biden I used earlier in the hearing be submitted for the record.
Well, without objection, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a unanimous consent request that a article from the Daily Mail dated today with the headline, January 6th protester Ray Epps reveals he's forced to live in an RV in hiding after death threats over FBI informant conspiracy. Feds confirm he's never worked for them as he slams right-wing theorists using him as a scapegoat. I'd like to offer this into the record.
Without objection, chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for your time today. You said earlier in response to Representative Issa's questions that the job of the FBI is to, 1, undertake criminal investigations, and 2, protect the U.S. from national security threats. Would you agree with me that in doing those activities, the FBI has to do a lot of that in what are effectively confidential conditions? Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you're undertaking those activities in those confidential conditions, you're going to require tools that have been appropriated by Congress in the past, tools that say to you, we're going to trust you to use those tools correctly, and in return, the FBI then is expected to not abuse the trust of those tools that are provided to the FBI to undertake its activities. Is that a correct statement as well?
Yes, I would agree with that.
So trust is a very important thing, both the giving of trust when you get those tools, and then making sure that you do not abuse those that trust once those tools have been given to you. Were you aware that, according to a recent poll by Harvard Caps Harris, 70% of respondents in the United States said that they were either very or somewhat concerned about interference by the FBI and other intelligence agencies in the elections? Were you aware of that?
I'm not aware of the particular survey or poll or study or whatever it is.
In that same poll, 71% of Americans, which is certainly a bipartisan group, agreed that internal FBI changes post-2016 had not done enough to prevent further interference in elections, and that, quote, wide-ranging reform was still required. And again, you're not aware of those numbers?
No.
Does any of that shock you?
You know, I don't spend a lot of time as FBI director worrying about polls. What I do look at is whether people want to work with us, whether people want to work for us. And on both of those metrics, we're actually going up quite significantly. In fact, in your home state of Texas, we've got a 93% increase in the number of Texans applying to work for the FBI since I've been in this job. And in fact, it's the highest. Texas has more people applying to work for the FBI than any other state in the union.
Even if you do not watch polls, certainly you appreciate the fact that you want the trust of the American people. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
All right. Does it bother you that so many Americans do not trust the FBI presently?
Well, again, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about polls. I do care about what I hear
I'm
from
asking about
American
the
people
trust.
otherwise. But it bothers me anytime any American has lost trust in the FBI. Of course, that concerns me.
Earlier, you're talking to Representative Hageman, and you said where we can take action where possible to remove them from the chain of command, and then you ended your time, you got cut off because we had to get some votes. You were going to say something further on that. Do you have any plans to remove anybody from the chain of command or go through a process to determine who should be removed from the chain of command?
Well, I have already removed any number of people from at different stages of my tenure from the chain of command. I have also referred people to our disciplinary arm, which has resulted in some cases in termination.
Do you have any plans to do any more of that?
If somebody has violated a rule, absolutely.
When we talk about a good faith basis for trust of Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, does it bother you that these illegal FISA queries have continued even with efforts of the FBI to try to reduce them, that we now have somewhere between a couple 100,000 and at least 1 million of illegal FISA inquiries?
Well, there are two things going on there. One, I think your numbers of what are actually illegal are off. But second, and more importantly to me, all of the changes that we have put in place to address compliance failures that I consider unacceptable have pointed to the effectiveness of the reforms that we've put in place. So that I'm talking about.
What number of illegal FISA queries would you put on the table as those that you know of?
Well, here's what I can tell you. The most recent FISA court opinion found, I think it's a like 98% compliance rate. The most recent DOJ audit found a 99 or 98% compliance rate.
Is that acceptable to you? Is that 1% or 2%?
We strive for 100%. But all of those things, whether it's the FISC, the FISA court, whether it's ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, whether it's DOJ, whether it's our own Office of Internal Audit, which I created, by the way, all four of those things have shown that the reforms that we've been putting in place have already had dramatic positive impact. Am I satisfied with that? No.
Has anybody been fired or removed as a result of their inappropriate use of FISA?
Well, the last time somebody has had truly abusive behavior with respect to FISA, it goes back a ways, but those people have been gone from the organization.
Are you making a distinction between truly abusive and just abusive? What's the distinction there?
Well, the distinction I would draw is between intentional or reckless conduct versus somebody who makes a good faith mistake. To me, a good faith mistake is still a compliance violation, and still somebody needs to be counseled and trained and coached and taught to do it right, but that's different from somebody who intentionally or recklessly breaks the rules.
Director Wray, I'm going to go back where I started, and that is with trust. We trust you when we give the FBI tools. We trust that those tools would not be abused. I think in the last 6 years, certainly we've seen a number of abuses of the tools given, and I think as a result of that, you're going to see a curtailment of some of the tools that are provided to the FBI. That's not a choice that we're in a position that we want to make, but we have to make as a result of the abuses of the trust of the American people. Thank you for your time today.
Gentleman yields back. Director, I have just a couple extra questions, but in fairness to the minority, I'll recognize Mr. Johnson, so he'll go for a few questions. I'll have a few, and then we appreciate you being here for this length of time, and then we'll be able to adjourn the hearing. But the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. Director Wray, you have acquitted yourself admirably today under severe and constant fire. And so your day is about to come to a close with your head still standing, your head still held high, and your soul, I'm sure, further empowered to continue doing the right thing on behalf of the American people through your service as Director of the FBI, and I thank you for that. You were asked multiple times about the Missouri versus Biden injunction. This is a preliminary injunction issued on a holiday, July 4th, Independence Day. And it makes various allegations that thus far have been totally unproven, but relied upon as true here by members of this committee. What is your response to the allegations that the FBI has been engaged in censoring social media platforms or anyone else?
Well, while I respect the court's decision, I think there are a number of factual findings that we don't agree with. And certainly the FBI is not engaged, in my view, in censorship or content suppression.
My Republican colleagues also seem to think that the FBI is being weaponized against the American people. What is your response to that allegation? And that will be my final question for today to you.
The FBI that I see every day, and again, when I see the FBI, nobody gets to see it the way I do. I've been to all 56 of our field offices at least twice. I've spoken with partners, law enforcement partners in all 50 states multiple times, with federal judges all over the country, with business leaders, community leaders, prosecutors, victims, more importantly, and their families. The FBI that I see every day is working their tails off to protect the American people from a really staggering array of threats. They are an inspiring, incredibly dedicated group of people. And the FBI I see is best captured by the Chicago agent who had his arm shot up by an AR-15 chasing a fugitive and retrained himself to shoot left-handed and then requalified for SWAT left-handed. By the Atlanta agent who unexpectedly came across a fugitive, a gang fugitive, chased the guy into a car, got caught in the car door. The guy drove off with the Atlanta agent stuck in the door. The guy headed out onto the freeway. The poor agent, broke his pelvis and Lord knows how many other things, and yet he still managed to apprehend the subject. The FBI that I see is captured by the Portland agent who, out for a run, comes across a mentally ill woman down in the train tracks and climbs down in the train tracks to try to wrestle her out of the way of the oncoming train while she's trying to bite him and everything else, and gets her to safety. Or the bomb tech who comes across a booby trap, blows up on him, and the next business day he's back at work. That's the FBI that I see. I could give you countless examples. That is the real FBI.
Well, I thank you again for your service, and I appreciate the fact that you have allowed your somewhat loquaciousness to emerge during this hearing with that final response. Thank you.
I think the gentleman yields back. Director, we appreciate those, the whole country does. In fact, I said this in an interview this morning, a TV interview this morning, as two of those agents who served for years in the FBI, did great work, now work for the committee on the Republican staff. And we appreciate the work they did then, the work they're doing now. But they share the same concerns raised by members of the committee. That's why they came to work for us. So I just got a couple other questions. Any of the FBI personnel who did improper queries of the 702 database, have any of those individuals lost their clearance?
Well, we had, depends on how far back you want to go in time. We've had individuals, if you go back to, say, like 2018, I think was the last I remember, where you had somebody who engaged in intentional conduct, and the person, for example, is gone. I think there were security clearances revoked for people back in that time period, but I don't know that we've had somebody who's engaged in, intentional or reckless conduct more recently than that. We have, as you may know, Mr. Chairman, and this actually didn't come up today, but it's important for people to know. We recently put in place a whole new set of accountability policies specifically focused on 702. They go through cascading consequences.
Yep.
And so that's an important
It's been reported that donors of a congressional member of Congress were illegally searched. Has that individual lost their clearance?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the specific example. So,
well, it's been widely reported that the donor base for a member of Congress has been searched, and I just wonder if the person responsible for that has had any consequences, like a loss of a security clearance.
I don't know the answer. as
Okay.
I sit here.
Is the FBI assisting the Secret Service in the investigation as to how cocaine wound up at the White House?
Yes, I want to be a little bit careful about what I can say here because the Secret Service is leading the investigation. But as is standard in an investigation where white powder is found, the FBI's lab personnel did an evaluation to determine whether or not there was a, sort of biological.
Is that the only assistance?
That's the only assistance we've done so far. We have offered the full range of our assistance to the Secret Service if they want to use us for that purpose. But beyond that, I would refer you to the Secret Service.
Is that offer's been denied? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. We've offered it to the Secret Service,
Okay.
but beyond that, I would refer to them.
In October of 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation, the FBI's answer was no comment. Who gave that answer?
And before you answer, sir, if I might just interject the fact that we agreed that I would have 2 questions and you would have 2 questions.
I think I said a couple questions.
Yeah, and you've asked a couple.
In fact, I don't
with
think, I know I said
several
a couple questions,
subparts.
but I gave you 5 minutes, so.
But I'll.
Do you want another question?
No,
Okay.
I want us to conclude this hearing, and I
And
respect
we will be
your
done in 2
prerogative as
minutes
the
and
chair.
10 seconds.
Thank you.
And we appreciate that, and we obviously appreciate the director being here. In October 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation, the FBI's response was no comment. Do you know who gave that response?
I did not.
The court knew, and the court said it was Laura Demlow. Do you know who Laura Demlow is?
I do know who Laura Demlow is.
And what does she do?
Laura Demlow is an agent in our counterintelligence division, and she currently works with the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Doesn't she head the Foreign Influence Task Force?
I think she leads it, yeah.
She leads the Foreign Influence Task Force. Did you tell her to give that comment?
Did I what now?
Did you instruct anyone, when Facebook asked, did you instruct them to give the no comment?
I don't remember giving any instruction along those lines, although I should say I'm not sure whether Laura Demlow was in that role at the time frame that you described, but
Again, the court in Louisiana said she was, and said when Facebook asked her specifically, she said no comment. And this is the Foreign Influence Task Force leader, Foreign Influence Task Force that you created as director of the FBI, correct?
I'm sorry.
All that's correct. You created the Foreign Influence Task Force.
I did create the Foreign Influence
Yeah,
Task
you put
Force.
that together, and she heads it up. Okay. How did you become aware of the Catholic memo? The one in Richmond that we've talked about a couple times today.
As I recall, in one of my regular morning meetings, I learned that there was this product, and that was the same day that I ordered that it be removed.
Was that before or after it was already in the press?
That I can't tell you. My guess is it was probably around the same time, but I don't know.
Did you learn about it? Did the people who brought it up to you, did they learn about it from the press, or was it some internal communication?
I can't speak to how they learned about it. I just know that I was told about it by them, and we had a conversation about immediately taking steps that we then did.
We appreciate that. Okay, Director, we appreciate your time today. I know it's been a long day. We already had the unanimous consent from Mr. Gates, so the committee is adjourned.